The rules for mistaken target are here on page 58 of the Flames of War version 4 rulebook. Mistaken target is also a Team Yankee rule on page 45. Generally, this video will cover both. I'll note the differences, if any, along the way. Mistaken target allows a targeted player to reassign hits from one team to another. This is a way for a player to protect their valuable teams within a unit by potentially sacrificing other nearby teams. You might do this to protect a HQ, or preserve special weapons like anti-tank weapon teams or flamethrowers. In normal shooting, the opponent allocates hits. The normal shooting rules specify how hits must be allocated, but as long as these are followed, the shooting player can place the hits where they like. Obviously, they'll choose to prioritize teams in the unit that are a greater threat. Again, this might be a HQ, or high rate of fire guns, flamethrowers, or teams with anti-tank weapons. The shooting player must place the first hit on the team they targeted, then assign any remaining hits evenly across the other teams in that unit that are valid targets. That means in range and in line of sight to be hit. Again, the shooting player will be expected to prioritize teams in the unit they consider a threat. If there are still excess hits to be allocated, the shooter can then allocate these evenly amongst the target teams again, until all the hits are allocated. Let's look at this in practice. My British infantry are going to be shot at by these German half-tracks. After rolling to hit, there are 6 machine gun hits to be allocated. This infantry team is the one that was declared the target, so it gets 1 hit. The boy's anti-tank rifle is the next biggest threat, so the shooting player chooses to allocate the next hit there. Hits must be spread evenly, so this goes on until all the teams in the target unit are allocated a hit. Note the infantry team behind the house is not allocated a hit. They're out of line of sight of the shooting teams and are not a valid target. There's still 1 hit left, and the shooting player chooses to allocate that to the anti-tank rifle team, the one he thinks is the biggest threat. So now all the hits have been allocated. All the teams have 1 hit except the rifle MG team that wasn't a valid target. The anti-tank rifle team has 2 hits. At this point we would normally start rolling infantry saves, but this is where mistaken target comes into play. The defending player can try and swap the 2 hits off the anti-tank team onto one of the infantry teams. This gives this specialist team a better chance of survival. The mistaken target game mechanic represents the fog of war, where it's hard to identify particular units or weapons in the heat of battle. In practice, it gives the defending player a chance to swap hits from one team to another team of the same type. Same type means tank, infantry, gun or aircraft teams. So infantry hits can only be swapped to other infantry teams, tanks to other tanks, and so on. This makes sense. If the shooter can't tell a tank from a rifleman, they probably wouldn't give them a weapon in the first place. The defending player identifies which 2 teams he's attempting to swap hits between and rolls a dice. On a roll of 3 or better, it succeeds. All the hits on one team are swapped with all the hits on the other. Let's see how that works in our example here. The defending player wants to swap the 2 hits from the anti-tank rifle team to another infantry team. You can even choose a team with no allocated hits and attempt to swap hits to it from another team, as long as the team you're attempting to swap the hits to is a valid target, in range of the firing weapon and in line of sight of the shooting team. Unfortunately, the defender can't do that here. The only infantry team without any hits isn't a valid target of the attacker, being out of sight behind the building. So they pick another team with a single hit and roll the die. A result of 4 is a success, so the 2 hits on the AT rifle team swap with the 1 hit on the infantry team. Given this roll was a success, the defending player could attempt to swap hits between other teams. Note that once a team's hit or hits has been swapped, it can't be swapped again, so neither of the 2 teams from the previous swap can be used to swap hits again before the combat's resolved. A defending player can keep attempting to swap hits using this rule until they fail a swap. Once they fail a swap attempt, all remaining hits remain where they are and the combat gets resolved. There's no point swapping any of the other hits here. It won't affect the outcome, so the defending player can choose to stop rolling mistaken target and move on to rolling infantry saves to resolve the combat. It's interesting to note that there's no range specified for mistaken target in the rules, only that the target team must be of the same type and are valid targets of the firing team. However, there is a minimum range within which mistaken target can't be used. If the shooting team is within 4 inches of an infantry or gun team or 8 inches of a tank team, it's too close for error. If either of the target teams attempting to swap hits is within this distance of the shooting team, mistaken target can't be used. The only other issue covered in the rules are HQs in independent teams like observers. When these teams are hit, the defending player may select a nearby unit of the same type and use the mistaken target rule to swap hits between them as if they were the same unit. In our example here, I'll add in the 2 Rifle Company HQ teams onto the table. If the shooting player fires at them, the defending player may choose to swap hits between the Company HQ teams and the adjacent Rifle Company teams, as if they were all the same unit. Let's recap mistaken target. After the shooting player allocates hits to a unit, the defending player may choose to use the mistaken target rule to swap hits from one team to another. These teams need to be of the same type, i.e. tank, infantry, gun, or aircraft. They also need to be valid targets for the firing unit, in range of the firing unit's weapons and in line of sight. Neither chosen team can have already swapped hits in this combat. None of the teams attempting to swap hits can be within 4 inches of the firing team. This distance is 8 inches if the target is a tank team. Mistaken target succeeds on a roll of 3+. All hits are swapped between the 2 nominated teams if the roll is successful. The defending player may choose to swap hits between other teams until they fail a roll or they choose to stop. On a failed roll, the mistaken target swap fails. All remaining units in the combat are resolved as they currently lie. So that's the mistaken target rule. When I first encountered it, I thought it was a bit gamey, like a few of the version 4 rules. But it does give the defender a chance to stop their opponent targeting high-value units. I guess it has its place. I hope this video's helped you understand this rule. Maybe you'll get to use it if you haven't used it before. Good luck!